How's it going, folks? Brian Cusco here at Triple B. We are continuing with the Herpeton talks. This is talk number 2 with Mike Reedy. He's going to be going over a very cool tree frog species with us today. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. You're watching Triple B TV.
My name is Michael Reedy, and I'm going to be talking about Phyllomedusidae frogs. And it's a group of amphibians that I've worked with for quite a while. And anyway, Philippe asked me to do a talk kind of on the status of this taxon in captivity. So I'm going to talk about that, and in addition to that, I'll kind of talk about my road to appreciating those animals, and just a little bit on their natural history as well. Yeah. So this is not a frog. This is an illustration by my grandfather, Leonard Descartes, and he was my introduction to wildlife in general, to making a lizard noose, and to captive exotics also. He used to take my brothers and I over to Western Zoological in Monrovia years and years ago. We'd collect lizards and sell them for a dime or a nickel or something. And anyway, I was fascinated by that place, and I think that's the first place that I saw toe pads sticking onto the glass from the outside, and I thought it looked so alien and so interesting, and I think that stuck with me at that point. So on to the Phyllomedusidae. It's now been elevated to a family. It used to be considered a subfamily of Hylidae, of hylid frogs. There's presently 65 species in 8 genera, and that's ever changing in terms of the taxonomy of all those genera. Most, if not all of you, are very probably familiar with this group of frogs, especially the red-eyed leaf frog, Aglycnis caladrius. But they're known for their brightly colored eyes. A lot of the species do have brightly colored or interesting eyes, like this black-eyed leaf frog in the bottom left there. They also, one of their traits among many of the species is they don't have webbing. They have more kind of fingers and opposable hands, and for that reason, some of them are considered monkey frogs, or called monkey frogs commonly. They're arboreal breeders. They breed in trees or just over water in foliage that's hanging over either temporary pools or sometimes moving water. So the eggs are laid, they develop, the tadpoles hatch and fall into the water below, where they develop and eventually metamorphose and emerge from the water. These are, Phyllomedusidae coming out of the water at Sandfire Dragon Ranch a while back. They're generally strongly nocturnal as a group. And for that reason, I think a lot of people give up on them. They'll kind of, there's the interest in their beautiful colors, and they're kind of iconic animals, a lot of them, especially the red-eyed tree frog. But after a while, you realize that they're sleeping while you're active, and at night they're active, and you can't really see them. Their colors dull down, and so forth. So I don't think a lot of people actually stick with this group of animals very long in terms of captive care. There are a few real diehard people who are still doing it, and new people come along. And it seems relative to other areas of herpetoculture, there's not a lot of people that stick with it long term, which is a shame, I think. There's other ways to appreciate them, or different angles to take on these. This is the call of a Cruzia hyla craspidopus. And I've been keeping a group of these for several years, to the point where it's just a normal sound in the household at night. It's not, it's not like some frogs where, they'll drive you crazy just with the frequency or volume of their call. These guys kind of have a subtle call, and it's really interesting. And what you hear there is kind of 2 calls going on, the mating call and also a protest call. Though they're very nocturnal and kind of lay low during the day, they do develop kind of a what would you call it? A feeding response. And this particular old female, she responds to me shaking crickets or food items in the bag, and then she wakes up. So I just filmed this the other day to try to show it. And this is like 2 in the afternoon, probably, something like that. And there she goes. So it's kind of a different angle, I think, in terms of care. One of the other very fascinating and I would say captivating parts of the herpetoculture of amphibians is the whole development of the embryos and eggs and metamorphosis and so on. These are not Phyllomedusian eggs. These are actually the eggs of White's tree frogs, which do have a common ancestor way back with Phyllomedusian frogs. But they do convey the same kind of thing that you would see in a developing egg mass of any leaf frog, if it were visible. But from just this little bean that looks like nothing, it comes this form, which is just miraculous from the outside. Heart's beating. And tadpoles. And with all these species, there's little life history aspects that are just so interesting. And this is not an unknown thing, but I think it's a little known thing. But you guys have probably seen videos of waxy monkey frogs, Phyllomedusidae, waxing themselves. They live in really arid, hot environments. So they cover themselves with a lipid. Well, it turns out that the lipid glands form early on, actually before metamorphosis or before the final metamorphosis. So when the tadpoles come out of the water, they immediately, as soon as they're kind of exposed to any dry air, they'll start waxing. So he's just wiping that lipid secretion around, and then it'll seal the frog up and protect it from desiccation. And so these little life history moments are the kinds of things, at least for me, that I've found so fascinating and what's kept me going in terms of wanting to keep and breed and sustain these species in captivity, also wanting to see them in the wild as well. So then there's this guy, Bob Mayhew, who's kind of changed the game for a lot of these species, especially Phyllomedusidae, which we've been talking about a lot. Bob has bred them repeatedly as generations of these frogs, and it's one of the few Phyllomedusians in captivity in which there's probably F4, maybe F5 generations. This species creates a funnel around the eggs. This is kind of an open funnel just before the tadpoles are about to hatch. And they also hatch into the water below in similar development. So I was lucky to work with Bob for about 6 years, about mid-2000s or so. And during that time, I learned a lot from him, of course, and we developed a lot of new protocols and did some really novel, interesting breedings, particularly with a wide range of Phyllomedusian frogs. Philippe and Alan were talking about kind of back in the day, and I never thought I'd get to that point where I'm talking about back in the day, but I remember back in the day, and probably some of the people that are here now I met because I put an ad or something in the back of a magazine looking for red-eyed tree frogs. You know, I had one male that I needed to pair up. So I'm grateful for that. And that's how we used to do it. And there were things like the short-lived Bulletin of the International Hylet Society that Will Brown started. And I've met people both in the US and abroad through that. So this is years ago, obviously, now. But things have changed, obviously, and I do agree to a point that the internet has ruined everything, but also there's pros and cons to it. So when Philippe asked me to speak on this topic of Phyllomedusian frogs in captivity, what is the status? And I've long said this, it's kind of always been the same. Nothing's really established. It's the same kind of species. But for a number of years, I kind of backed off, pared back my collection, just kept a couple species going. So I wasn't really paying much attention to it. But I found these two Facebook groups, and they're both quite impressive. And the number of species that people are keeping is quite impressive as well, excuse me. And it's not so much what you were saying, Philippe, as kind of the cute gecko club or anything. These guys are pretty serious herpetoculturists, and they do share information very openly. There's a lot of progress being made, I think, because of that. And it does make it easier to contact people if you do have a species or one that you're looking for, or an issue, and so forth. So the learning curve is a lot shorter than it used to be. So those are the benefits as I see them in terms of today's technology versus putting an ad and waiting and hoping. I did put together this based on what I could find out. This is an ongoing project now. I'm pretty inspired to keep this going and develop it out as much as I can. I did post some surveys and got some feedback in terms that was helpful, but kind of based on what I could glean, these are the species currently in captive care. So, a good chunk of the 60 or so species. A lot of them have been captive bred. Some of them are actually now being captive bred in situ, like the Wikiri frogs. There's a number of them that are it's kind of a win-win situation, supporting conservation. Some of them also are I wouldn't say maybe it's ranching or something like that. There's young frogs or tadpoles being raised and then exported. And from what I can tell, there's a greater degree of established animals than I expected. Not great, but a number of people are reported, up to fourth generation on Savagi, third generation on Craspidopus, which is one I'm working with as well. And so forth. So that's interesting stuff, and there's a lot of room, of course, for improvement. I think the availability of wild-caught Phyllomedusian frogs kind of doesn't really inspire people to establish them as much as what's happened, let's say, with leopard geckos, or things that you're not really able to replenish easily. So I don't know what would happen if imports of Calodrias were cut off. They have been at times, and they seem to just kind of disappear. But I think we're at a stage now where enough people keep them and enough people are aware of successful breeding techniques that they could be established fairly quickly. The key would be to, as Philippe was mentioning, really pay attention to genetics long term. I don't think that's addressed really at all in this part of herpetoculture. It is to a degree with dendrobatid frogs, but not so much with this group. And I think it's mostly due to the limited size of people and what they can keep. The limited size of the number of people who are working with these, and then the number of species that they can't keep in any large numbers. A few of these that are on this list are also listed as endangered or critically endangered, and are being successfully bred in captivity. So that is a hopeful thing, and something I think that will give back for any kind of in situ and ex situ breeding projects. And this is just information that I gathered in doing this research, just to try to understand what the numbers are like in terms of imports. I have no way of knowing really how many red-eyed tree frogs are captive bred these days. They're pretty readily available. But there are quite a number imported still. And the USA takes the bulk of those. So if you figure, based on the imports, it's about 25,000 a year. The quotas, I think, are about 35,000 a year out of Nicaragua. And that'd be about 800 or maybe 600 or 800 spawns, depending on the average size spawn. So it wouldn't take a lot of people to really devote time, but you could probably produce almost that many frogs out of, say, 100 females with, 6 different people, something like that. So that was just food for thought, and I'm hopeful to talk to more of you if you have ideas or have experience with this group of animals that you'd like to share. I'd be interested in hearing it. So as I mentioned, this is the frog species that I work most closely with and have for a while. It was a holy grail for many, many years, but is one that I've found to be one of the easier ones to breed and keep. And that's a little illustration of their life cycle from egg to metamorph. And so Bob's not here right now. Unfortunately, I put this slide in for him. When you do see him later this weekend, you can ask him why he's never bored. And some of you may already know this joke. So anyway, if you have any questions, I can take them now or we can talk later.
Good job on that talk, Mike. I hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. As you may know by now, we are going to be continuing these Herpeton talks every other week here on Triple B TV until we've run through all of them. And next week, we're going to be chatting with my buddy Anthony Zavala over at Granddaddy Herps, doing one of our old long-lost Snakes with Friends episode. That's going to happen next week. So until then, you've been watching Triple B TV. Y'all take care.